the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our weekly flagship show, The Talking Point. Our experts tonight, Dr. Anna Kireeva joins us from Moscow. She's an associate professor at the Department of Asian and African Studies and a research fellow at the Center for Regional Projects and Comprehensive Chinese Studies at Moscow State Institute of International Relations, MGIMO. Afternoon, Dr. Kireeva. Thank you so much for your time.
That's a huge delight. Thank you for having me again.
The pleasure is ours. And in the capital of India, in Delhi, we have Nandan Unnikrishnan, the distinguished fellow with the Observer Researcher Foundation. Nandan, good to see you again. You've taken a break from
Thank you for inviting
for a while, right?
me. Delightful to be with such a distinguished guest like Anna.
Absolutely, I second that. Nandan, is going to start with you, though we'll talk about the Xi Jinping and Putin meet as well. In terms of what's been happening here, I mean, India didn't follow the Western diplomatic boycott of the Olympic Games. Then a soldier who was injured during Galwan was made a torchbearer for the Olympics. India had to retaliate, said diplomats would not attend the opening and closing ceremonies. Your comments on that?
Well, I think the Chinese action was in very poor taste. And obviously, India was put into a very awkward situation. And therefore, they took what they thought was the most appropriate steps, which also at the same time keeps them separate from the general Western boycott, which is the US led call for an official boycott. So, in that sense, I suppose we were threading the middle path. And we have arrived after a lot of calculation and calibration at these steps as the most effective way of conveying our point to the Chinese.
I'm just going to play out what the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi had to say, and soon after that, what the U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price had to say before I go on to Dr. Kireeva. First, Arindam Bagchi.
Regrettable that the Chinese side has chosen to politicize an event like the Olympics. I wish to inform that our chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of India in Beijing will not be attending the opening or the closing ceremony of the Beijing 22 Winter Olympics.
And now Ned Price, who was also asked a question both on, it was initially on Ukraine and whether India-U.S. Relations were being hit. And then he also asked about the same developments, Ned Price, U.S. State Department spokesperson.
Has it been impacted because of the tensions with Russia?
No, we have a relationship with India that stands on its own, merits.
Can I ask one more? You must have seen the Beijing Olympics in which they used a soldier who was engaged in on the border clash with India. There have been few senators who have raised objections to it. How do you see that?
When it comes to the broader issue of India-China border situation, we continue to support direct dialogue and peaceful resolution of the border disputes. We've previously voiced our concerns of Beijing's pattern of ongoing attempts to intimidate its neighbors. As we always do, we stand with friends, we stand with partners and allies to advance our shared prosperity, security, and values in the Indo-Pacific.
Dr. Kireeva, in your view, the tension between India and China, how does that impact India-Russia relations?
For sure, for Russia, China and India are very close and important strategic partners. So that's in Russia's interest to maintain as robust and vigorous partnership with both of them as it's possible. And I mean, Russia views really China and India as one of the major powers in the multipolar world order. So Russia really is concerned when there are clashes on the China-Indian border, and Russia would not really like to see the tension escalating. So here, I guess. Russia tries to keep this in a separate way. So to keep Russia-China strategic partnership as much separate from Russia-India privileged strategic partnership as possible. At the same time, Russia has also been quite adept as acting as a kind of intermediary because last year when there was escalation of crisis, it was in Moscow where the representatives of China and India security ministers met, so and foreign ministers as well. So I think Russia believes that it can try to play this role if the two sides can actually agree with that. So I guess Russia would like also to de-escalate and to see the kind of peaceful resolution here.
Just one final question on the subject, Nandan, in terms of why the Chinese would have done something like that, to choose a Galwan soldier, a torchbearer. Is it internal signaling or is it external signaling? And just to put it in context, there's been a recent report, I think it's from Claxon in Australia, suggesting that, the Chinese, at least 38 other soldiers also died there, which the Chinese have not admitted. They have only officially admitted 4. You're muted, Nandan.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
The Claxon report, of course, has created waves in India. The Indian media has been covering the story quite intensely since yesterday. As far as why China is doing these things, I think whatever leaderships do all over the world, they are always looking at a domestic audience. But there is also a certain level of signaling that is going externally. They are trying to, of course, the injured officer who carried the torch is probably predominantly internal messaging. But there is also a message to the rest of the world that China is standing its ground. China believes it is right, and it should not be taken uh, for granted, if you want, in the sense that China is likely to succumb and change course.
Sure. Nandan, now, I mean, moving to other signals which are coming from inside Beijing itself, when you have Xi Jinping and President Putin meeting before the opening ceremony. They had a walking lunch, I believe, joint statement as well. Any key points there? One thing that stand out, though, I was talking to Dr. Kireeva before we went on air, and she's saying it's part of statements for years now. But in the current context, Taiwan and Ukraine.
Well, one is you have to keep in mind that Russia and China have grown very close in the past few years. The relationship is probably the best it has been between the two countries since 1955, I guess. Uh, uh, so in that sense, I understand why they tend to meet so often and why they have such warmth, even at the personal level. Putin and Xi are meeting for the 38th or 39th time. It's quite a lot. That is one. Second, of course, the background that you mentioned, particularly Ukraine, is important from a Russian perspective. And this meeting, in a sense, secures, if not direct, at least indirect support from China. But even the statements issued mentioned the fact that China supports Russia's concerns about security on its borders and hopes that this issue will get resolved in a peaceable manner. Which actually echoes what we have said on the subject. We have also called for a peaceful resolution. We also don't like the tension. Uh, China is, in that sense, quite happy with what the United States is doing or the West is doing, because effectively this does push Russia closer to China. And so China doesn't have to worry about its northern front, as it were. And China and
Sure.
Russia together are a formidable force.
Dr. Kireeva, your comments on Taiwan, like you're saying, it's a position that Russia has taken before, but just in the current context, it's being looked at a lot. People talk about, a two-front war, or Xi Jinping taking a leaf out of President Putin's book if he goes into Ukraine at the same time. Your comments?
I guess Taiwan and the position that Taiwan is considered by Russia as a part of China, and that Russia opposes Taiwan's independence, it has been in official documents in Russia-China declarations and in the Friendship Treaty of 2001 as well. So that's kind of a long-standing position. We have seen Lavrov mentioning it last year explicitly and also this year, but probably this is just due to the tensions that we are witnessing in the Taiwan Strait. Still, it is kind of unlikely that we see a major military conflict over Taiwan in short term. That's why I think it's kind of only speculation if we're trying to link it. But I would agree with Nandan, which is really important, is that we have seen several references here to NATO and China offering a kind of diplomatic support here. At first, supporting Russia's position that China, that the two states are against NATO enlargement. Again, this is kind of paying its due or in supporting Russia's position here. And the second has been that China respects and supports Russian position and proposals on the European security, also which were given to the US and NATO, also regarding the Ukrainian crisis. So, of course, it's not a kind of a military support. We don't speak about obligations, but we still can say that it's kind of an important diplomatic support here. And again, it's quite logical because China also has the pressure from the United States on in the other part of the world. So. Actually, we have seen references to both of states opposing alliances, American alliances previously as well. But here alliances, American alliances in Asia and in Europe as well. It has been present, I think, since 2016 in mutual declarations. But here we have it explicitly mentioning NATO.
And NATO, the situation in Ukraine, and as you pointed out, there are many, Nandan, who say that the situation is pushing Russia closer to China. You said they're formidable together. But in terms of impact on India, even at the height of the Galwan clashes, when Rajnath Singh and Jaishankar went to Moscow, the arms supplies or arms spare supplies, S-400s, that was not impacted at all. Do you see that continuing?
Yeah, look, Russia is not interested in becoming anyone's ally. Russia is not interested in being a junior partner of any great nation.
Smaller brother,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so it is, the aspiration of multipolarity is something India and Russia both share. So when you have that, when you're seeking a multipolar world in which you consider yourself a great power or one of the centers of power, then it's quite obvious that you will pursue an independent foreign policy. And in terms of this independence, I think Russia will not at this stage, at any point of time, give up its relationship with India, however much China may like it, just as we are not giving up our relationship with Russia despite immense pressure from the United States.
Right. Dr. Kireeva, your thoughts on, the S-400s are supplied to both India and China, on Russia and China's military or security partnership?
Also, just I agree completely. For Russia, that's kind of important to have strong security and political partnership with both China and India. So I also don't see that it it may have an impact here. If I may also add a little bit, I think that it's important to say that Russia and China wouldn't really like to become entangled into serious security conflicts of each other. I mean, Russia wouldn't really like to see itself entangled in a security conflict in Asia, for example, over Taiwan. I mean, just like having some military obligations to do this. And it's quite the same. Also, China wouldn't really like to see itself entangled in Russia's conflict with NATO in Europe over Ukraine. China has its own conflicts, lots of them. It's kind of occupied already to have more.
Right. One area where India and Russia have been cooperating in the military technological field, Nandan, BrahMos, and that's been successfully a first contract, third country, Philippines. How do you see that dynamic and reportedly, demands from other Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and all over the globe? How does that impact China?
Well, I'd just like to go back to the previous question for just literally a couple of sentences.
Sure.
I would like to add that the problem over Ukraine, or rather not Ukraine, I think it's a problem of European security. Ukraine is merely the trigger. This problem has come at a very bad time for us. Because if you notice, this is the time we were expecting U.S. to announce that they are waiving the sanctions on S-400. But obviously now, given the state of relationship with Russia, that has been put under a question mark. Hopefully right now it's only a question mark over the announcement, not about the decision itself. So it is something that impinges on India, and India has to consider very carefully how it moves forward in future. That is one. But coming back to joint development of weaponry that we have done with Russia, yes, it is interesting because Russia is the only country with which we have so far been successful in this field. Where we have been able to set up a fairly robust program of production of missiles, where there is collaboration, a genuine collaboration between both countries. As far as China is concerned, China is obviously upset, would be. I mean, anyone would be. But China also recognizes that it can't go around crying about it in the rest of the world. It just has to, in a sense, to use the millennial language, it has to man up and move on. So I think the Chinese are aware of the BrahMos capacities. It is aware that all countries that are talking to India or are likely to buy it from India are not necessarily the most friendly nations to China. But these are factors that I think the Chinese foreign policy pundits believe they can overcome through robust economic relationships and through a certain level of coercion.
If I may jump in here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's also very important to distinguish between the level of military cooperation between Russia and China and Russia and India in this regard. So with India, we do have joint production and we do have joint research, but we don't have the same level of cooperation with China, although, of course, our military sales to China are quite large. But mostly there are things that are produced such as specific technologies for sale in China, and also several licensed arms sales, but there is no such level of joint military production, which I would say is very important to Russia-India partnership. It's also a very important characteristic of trust that exists between Russia and India.
Does, on the question of trust, Dr. Kireeva, does Vladimir Putin trust Xi Jinping?
Wow. I think that, as Nandan has already mentioned, the two leaders actually have met, I think, much more than they have met any other leader at all during their terms. So I guess they're very well familiar with each other, and they do have a kind of trusting relationship, personal relationship as well. But also Putin and Modi do have a good chemistry, don't they?
Well, I mean,
If I
there was
may,
no
if
handshake.
I
That may have
may,
been COVID. Go ahead, Nandan.
one thing I would like to say is from an Indian perspective, we are genuinely concerned about some aspects of the military cooperation that Russia has with China. I mean, for example, Russia's participation in developing anti-ballistic missile system for China is something that would concern us because that requires a very close cooperation and interaction in a very sensitive area. That is point one. So we don't know the depth of it. I mean, these are obviously things that are not announced publicly. But I think there are areas of concern amongst the Indian policy makers. As far as the question of trust comes, Amitabh, I don't think there is a single political leader in any country that trusts another political leader in another country. You are governed by your national interests, particularly if you're a great power. So if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, you're going to stand for your national interest. But it is at the lower level that you have to speak of the level of trust, the level of officials, the level of, let's say, the military. And there, undoubtedly, India right now is much better off than China is. Is that for very long? I don't know. I'm not making any predictions. But at this point, we do have a slight advantage.
Dr. Kireeva, again, in the joint statement, like you pointed out earlier, the link between BRI and the Eurasian Economic Union, that is not new, but is it significant? And if you could just enlarge on, has there been anything on the ground in terms of actual projects being linked?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a great one. Actually, we have seen Russia supporting China's Belt and Road Initiative, and China also supporting the Eurasian Economic Union and Russia's Greater Eurasian Partnership, broader regional agenda. Back in 2019 already, it was during the second Belt and Road Forum when there was also such declaration. Also, during the bilateral summit, we also had this kind of support. So it's not something that we have seen only today. I think it has been going on here for some years now. And also, of course, it's the part of mutual support for each other and the idea that we should somehow connect the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative going back to 2015, actually. So that's kind of, I think, a deep understanding that we do support each other projects. But what we should probably ask ourselves is how we measure actually, is there any real connection between the two, and how we actually measure what kind of joint projects do we have. And that's kind of a tricky issue. Up to date, we do have a treaty on joint economic partnership between the Eurasian Economic Union and China, but this is a non-preferential treaty. It mostly has things like customs facilitation, trade facilitation measures, digital commerce, and others. So it's not really something that changes a lot in trade in goods or services here. So it's more like trade facilitation thing. Then there is a tricky question like, what projects are we looking at if we want to see that there is some kind of connection, cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and China? I mean, if we look at bilateral level, of course, we can see a lot of things going on between Russia and China, and also between other countries, members of the Union, and China. That's for sure. But this is kind of bilateral level. However, if we look at something like multilateral thing, I don't know, like multilateral joint huge investment infrastructure projects, something like this, we can't see any of such projects up to date. So there was supposed to be a Moscow-Kazan high-speed railway that was supposed to be a kind of a pilot project for connecting the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road, but it hasn't materialized. And actually, President Putin said that Russia is not going to pursue it. So I guess that's kind of a tricky thing, because actually the Belt and Road it encompasses all kind of projects. You can say that all things in terms of cooperation between China and all the countries along the Belt and Road, all Asia, Eurasia, even Africa and Europe, it can just be put into this Belt and Road framework, and it can be it can be emphasized as it is a kind of success of the Belt and Road. Also, it can actually be a kind of bilateral dynamics here. The same here. So, I mean, it's kind of difficult to measure how we can actually see it. So, diplomatically speaking, politically speaking, we have this agreement that we do support each other initiatives. But practically speaking, we don't have a lot of multilateral projects. Most of the cooperation is bilateral only.
And then if you want to add to that, and also Russia and China, everything is not hunky-dory. I mean, say in the Russian Far East, or as that Matara says, there's friction of the Arctic area as well.
Well, on the BRI, the only thing I would like to add is that all said and done, most of the trains that run from China to Europe, and there are many of them, they run through Russian territory one way or the other. So that is something that should be kept in mind. As far as the tensions between Russia and China, I don't think there is anything visible right now. There are these undercurrents which expert community, obviously people like me, we make our living out of them by trying to say that this will happen in the future, kind of thing. So there are some areas which could develop into tensions. One is, of course, everyone loves to mention Central Asia, because at the end of the day, economic penetration into a particular area inevitably will lead to political influence. And then you will have competing political influences between Russia and China. After all, local elites will have to, at some point, I mean, they'll play both, but they will at some point choose one. So that is one danger. As far as the Russian Far East is concerned, the concern is more Russia's, I suspect. They don't want to become over dependent on China to develop a region which is a priority region for them. The Russian state has declared that they would like to develop very quickly, develop the Far Eastern region, the economic region, because the area is unable to hold the population, does not offer enough opportunities. And you have to keep in mind that it is an area of roughly 6 million square kilometers, and it has less than 5 million people. So it is a concern for Russia, and they want to deal with it. But at the same time, they don't want to become over dependent on any one country. And one of the reasons they have welcomed India's participation. Our announcement in 2019 by Prime Minister Modi was welcomed by the Russians.
$1 billion in credit there, but is it large enough, the area? I don't mean territorially, but for India and China and other, whether it's Japan or others, to also, is it competing, or how do you see it on them?
No, if all of us can compete in the Maldives, surely we can compete in the Far East.
Absolutely. In terms of energy, it will be again because of
I
the
think Anna
situation
wants to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, so on the Far East, Russia very well understands that it cannot develop the Far East alone. Attracting investment from other states, especially the ones that are really next door to the Far East, is a very logical step. So I guess here Russia also tries to diversify its partnerships, and it has never concentrated only on China. Of course, China is the closest neighbor here, and it's extremely important in terms of trade and investment. But also South Korea and Japan, they have been very important, formidable trade and investment partners in the Far East as well. So I guess we would like to see more countries here, and Russia-India partnership in the Far East is one of the things that could look kind of promising. So again, Russia wouldn't really like to put all the eggs in one basket, only in the Chinese basket, but to diversify here.
And is
Russia
that
is
another
discovering the joys. Russia is discovering the joys of non-alignment in the Far East.
strategic autonomy? But Dr. Kireeva, is that another example? Is another example the gas deals between Russia and China of diversifying, not keeping all its Russia's eggs in one basket?
Yeah, probably. We have seen a trend for Russian energy exports in general, just to try to diversify its energy exports, not to concentrate only on the European market, but more on the Asian market. And here, of course, China comes as number one priority partner. I mean, it's quite logical. It's geographical proximity, and it's also huge demand that China has. Russia has been actually been pursuing its policy very steadily to try to increase its share in China and the share of exports that goes to China. We have both oil and gas here, and even LNG coming a little bit as well. So we have seen the new deal between Gazprom and Chinese CNPC that Russia will export its gas from the Far East to China, about 10 trillion cubic meters per year. So it will add to the power of Siberia. Power of Siberia is about 38. So all in all, it will be like 48 cubic trillion meters per year, which is again part of this kind of broader diversification campaign here. And also, of course, there are other important partners for Russia. We do have the Eastern Siberia Pacific Ocean pipeline. One of its parts goes to China, but the other part goes to the Vladivostok area, to Kozmino port, and from here the export go to Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asian states as well. So also as far as LNG is concerned, Russia is trying to diversify here as well, and we have seen Russian exporting not only to China, its Arctic, new Arctic LNG projects, but also to Japan, also to South Korea, and also to India.
Nandan, is something on this subject you want to add? Because I just wanted to then move on to another leader who's in Beijing.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. I think Anna has summed it up well, except one small factor. You know, there was a third pipeline which comes through Mongolia, which was discussed, and I personally thought that an agreement on that would be signed. So that has not happened. That was supposed to be a pipeline with a capacity of 50 trillion cubic meters. Now, I don't know why that is not signed. Maybe some discussions on the price and all that. But so Russia's energy relationship with China is set to grow despite the constraints of climate change.
A quick question. I think there were about 20 plus odd leaders who are there for the Beijing Olympics and subsequently having meetings. One of them is another neighbor of India. Mr. Imran Khan is there, Nandan. We know the economic situation. We know the China-Pakistan nexus through the decades and how that has affected the region and the world. But he's not meeting Putin. Biden is not calling him up. But how do you see the Russia-Pakistan dynamic working in the region, Nandan?
You know, I am not in that school of thought that is particularly obsessed with the Russia-Pakistan relationship. I understand the compulsions that Russia has to develop better ties with Pakistan. I understand the interests that are driving Russian foreign policy in this direction. And I also recognize that given where Pakistan is today, there is always going to be a limitation on how far that relationship can go, either in the economic or even in the military sphere. So Pakistan may want a lot of things, but Russia is not going to give them an open checkbook to buy military hardware. Pakistan will have to pay hard dollars to, or whatever the currency they agree on, to buy anything from Russia. And right now, I don't think Pakistan has that capacity. So I personally am not greatly worried about it. But yes, the Russians are concerned about other aspects of Pakistan's activities. They are concerned with the situation in Afghanistan. They are concerned with militant groups that are operating in Central Asia. So there is a reason for them to try and engage with Islamabad.
Right. Dr. Kireeva, if I know you're not a Pakistan expert, you're an India, Russia, China expert, but if you want to comment on that in terms of, does Moscow realize that there are some red lines that India would have vis-a-vis Pakistan?
Well, yes, I guess I don't work on Pakistan, right? But I guess there is some understanding, and also in terms of importance of partnerships, for sure, Russia uh, is for Russia, India is a much more important partner. It has always been so, and I expect it to continue this way. At the same time, it's important for Russia to have discussions with different states on board in terms of what has been happening in Afghanistan, because the question of Afghanistan is very important for Russian Central Asian partners and thus to Russian own security, both traditional and non-traditional security aspects such as terrorism, drug trafficking, and others. And given the state of the border between different countries and Tajikistan, it's quite logical that Russia is really concerned about the security issues here. So I guess in this regard, dialogue and relationship with Pakistan is important for Russia.
Right. In fact, when you're talking about partnerships, Dr. Kireeva, a question for you from Dinesh Kumar. It found mention in the joint statement. How important is the Indo-Pacific region for Russia, Asia Pacific, if you go by the Russian terminology? And would there be a military alliance between Russia and China in the region, I presume? He's asking Dr. Kireeva.
Great questions here. I guess that Asia Pacific is one of the major strategic regions. I mean, the strategic priorities of Russia's foreign policy, of Russia's economic relations, and Russia's energy relations. We have seen Russia's, kind of steady course to diversify its relationship, not to focus only on Europe, as Russia used to do, but increasingly more in Asia. And Russia's conflict with the West acted as a kind of impetus here, making Russia more focused on trying to find some other new spheres of cooperation. Mostly we have seen it in Russia's development, in the development of Russia's relations with China, but also there have been attempts to provide some new momentum to Russia's relations with other states, including India as well here. So I guess Asia Pacific is also important because the Far East is geographically situated here in this region. So we need to have, we need to preserve the security of the region. And also, again, we need to have more robust economic relationships simply because a lot of economic and business opportunities are here in the region. The second thing, is there going to be an alliance? I guess in the short to medium term, the answer should be negative. It is very unlikely that Russia and China will form an alliance. There are many reasons for that, but I think the major ones is that both Russia and China consider themselves to be great powers. And they first and foremost value their own national sovereignty, their strategic capability to take independent foreign policy decisions. So it's very important to have this kind of strategic environment and to have the freedom of foreign policy and freedom of maneuver, as much sovereignty as they can have. So forming an alliance would mean some obligations. And as I have mentioned earlier, it's not in Russia's interest to become entangled in China's conflicts in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, and the same for China and Russia's conflicts with NATO. So I guess it's not really going to happen. But even without, it's not really considered necessary with policymakers in both Moscow and Beijing to form an alliance. Even with that, there has been growing security and military cooperation. There has been growing military interoperability between the two different exercises, the missile early warning system that Nandan has mentioned today. So there have been actually more vigorous security cooperation recently, and Russia and China feel that it's quite good this way because it's more flexible. We can do together, coordinate what we want, but without the obligations that will actually entangle us in each other conflicts.
Nandan, final comments? I mean, BrahMos to Philippines,
Well,
maybe
two,
other
three
Southeast
things.
Asian countries.
One is that in the Russian approach to China could be summed up by saying, not with you, but not against you, kind of thing. But talking about Russia in the Indo-Pacific, they have, for example, they recently conducted naval exercises with ASEAN
ASEAN.
in areas which I'm sure China would not be very happy with. But what surprises me, and this is something that I would love to hear Russians comment on, a formal comment, because China recently signed a statement with ASEAN in which the term Indo-Pacific is used, and it's an official statement. Right? But Russia, even unofficially, will only attack the concept of the Indo-Pacific. So I'm finding that a little strange because Russia is attacking it because of China. Now, if China is willing to accept the term on board in an official statement with ASEAN, I really don't see a reason why Russia has to, at this stage, be more loyal than the king.
Perfect note to end this discussion. Nandan Unnikrishnan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Delightful to be with Anna again.
Absolutely. Dr. Kireeva, it was a great pleasure having you again, and we'll keep up this discussion in the future as well.
Thank you so much for having me again. It was a great discussion here, as always.
Our viewers also, I'm afraid I couldn't take all the questions or comments, but we do keep them coming. Do also follow our social media handles. Follow us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And since many of you are asking for a UPI payment ID to contribute and support our kind of journalism, putting it up on the screen, it's also there in the YouTube descriptor. You've been watching The Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi.